Welcome, everyone. I see people rushing in from the waiting room. We're going to hold for just a minute or so as everyone moves over into this now full webinar. Welcome to it, folks. The number is still climbing, so we're going to wait as attendees move into the main room. All right. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are calling in from. We're going to begin today's webinar on EIC's new risk management for an adapting and innovating industry. My name is Marshall Bradshaw. I'm a member of the EIC staff, and before the session begins, I have some important housekeeping notes for you. First off, this presentation is being recorded. It will also run approximately 60 minutes, including question and answer time at the end. It will also be available afterwards on the EIC YouTube channel. All attendees watching live today will receive CEs, which will appear on your account within the next week. Attendees can listen to the webinar through their computers or by dialing in using the number and passcode provided by the Zoom software. We also welcome you to utilize the closed captioning function. Click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen, and you will find the link to the live subtitles. If you have questions, you don't have to wait until the end of the presentation to submit them. We encourage you to submit your questions using the question and answer panel, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Now, it's separate from the chat, but feel free to say hello in the chat before entering your question in the Q&A panel instead. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation and send the unanswered questions out to our panelists to continue to get their feedback and answers and hopefully be able to present that. And now I will hand it over to the CEO of IAC and the chair of the Events Industry Council, Mark Cooper.
Marshall, thank you, and hello everybody, event professionals around the globe. I am honoured as EIC's chair to moderate today's session around the release of the guide for risk management. The business events industry is in the middle of what can only be called the perfect storm at the moment. For 18 months, we've had to chart our way through times where there's been little data to help us make those informed decisions to design the future solutions that are going to be critical for us. Now, some call it calculating risk, some call it risk management. Whatever we call it, it's all essential and necessary to help us move forward, to survive and to succeed. Well, I can tell you, this is music to the ears of those who love risk management. Just look at the smiles on the faces of my powerful panel of industry experts that are joining us today. They are relishing the fact to be able to talk about this in relation to the guide. This commitment from our Apex task force helps EIC chart a process for risk management and that duty of care that's so critical. So who do we have today that are going to help us navigate through these uncharted waters? It's my absolute pleasure to begin by welcoming Stuart Ruff-Lim, CMP DES, Vice President of Events and Exhibitions and Risk and Insurance Management Society. Stuart's got 23 years as an events industry veteran. He's principal reviewer for Risk Management Guide released today, and he's also on the COVID task force and serves on PCMA's board of directors. Stuart, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here.
Next, I'd like to transfer us over to Beta So, Executive Director of Singapore Association of Convention and Event Organisers, joining us late tonight, her time, but looking as spring and sprightly as she would at 9 o'clock in the morning. Welcome. Educated at the University of Adelaide, Beta is champion for the MICE industry. Working closely with the Singapore government, she helps shape the future for Singapore's meetings, incentive conventions, exhibitions and events industry. So welcome, Beta. We're thrilled to have you with us.
Well, greetings from Singapore, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And I see a lot of my neighbors here. I see Malaysians, Koreans, friends from the Asia Pacific. So we're very glad to be part of the EIC community. Glad to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Now I'd like to move to Melvin Tennant, CEO of Meet Minneapolis. Melvin is a winner of the EIC 2020 Social Impact Award, and he's been applying more time recently, I hear, to writing, teaching and mentoring, closely following in his mother's footsteps. Is that right, Melvin?
Exactly right. She was a great teacher, mentor, and shaped me. And hopefully I will only reflect her good qualities. But thank you for having me today, Mark.
My pleasure, Melvin. You have many to shape and mentor today, so it's a golden opportunity for you. Next, I'd like to move over to Tyra Warner from the from the Department Chair of Hospitality, Tourism and Culinary Arts at the College of Coastal Georgia. Now, Tyra has spent 17 years as a full-time hospitality and tourism faculty member, teaching hospitality and tourism, meetings and events management. Somehow, Tyra's also managed to fit in being a member of EIC's Apex and CMP Commission and has given time to join us today. So Tyra, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm glad to be here.
And last but not least, I'm going to introduce Liz Warwick, consultant of Warwick Strategic Planning. And now I realize why I've been asked to moderate, because I'm one of very few that pronounce Warwick the way that it should be. And Liz, actually, I'm 6 miles away from the Warwick in England and the beautiful Warwick Castle. So I feel we're at one today. And Liz is an active member of our COVID task force, contributed to the Apex Meetings and Event Design Guidebook, and colleagues apparently refer to you as a rare find, Liz, a key player in the development of the meetings industry experts around the world. So we're thrilled to have you join us today.
Great, thank you, Mark, and welcome to all my friends that I can see online. And I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so happy to be a part of this group.
Thank you, Liz. So now I'm going to go cameras off and we're going to have a deep dive into this now, and looking forward to navigating through the guidebook. So I'll be here throughout the way, but I'll just take myself off camera as we go through the next stage.
Great. Thanks so much. Go ahead.
Oh, I beg your pardon. So I was going to say, Tyra, first on behalf of EIC, thank you for the contribution and development of the new resource that we're announcing today, this EIC Risk Management Guidebook. Can you tell us a little bit about how it was developed, how we can all use it and make use of it, and walk us through the principles of the guidebook itself?
Sure, it'd be my pleasure. And it's also my honor to show the guidebook. So let me do that. It's my pleasure to show it. And I do have to say, this has certainly been a collaborative effort. But I do want to talk a little bit about it, as well as showing it, talk a little bit about sort of where it came from. And it was really my honor to be a part of putting it together. It's been a while coming. I also had the opportunity to help work on the chapter on risk management for the CIC manual at the time, the 8th edition. And so some of the material came from that. I think the bio that you read on me is the first time in many, many years that anybody has not mentioned that I'm also an attorney, which is how I sort of got into risk management in the first place, was sort of the liability aspects of not being prepared. So that's sort of where my interest in this came from. But the sort of the foundation documents in coming up with this guide, were the FEMA 141 Emergency Management Guide for Business and Industry, and the NFPA 1600, the National Fire Protection Association 1600 Standard on Continuity, Emergency and Crisis Management, kind of formed the basis for where the information for this came from. I did, just so everybody knows, it didn't just come out of thin air. When I was working on my PhD dissertation was on crisis preparedness of meeting planners. So I had a lot to sort of draw on as we were developing this. I studied a lot of researchers in this area. Some of my favorites were Dennis Milletti, who was a disaster researcher who died earlier this year, and Ian Mitroff, who's big in crisis management, but also some people from our industry. Julia Silvers, rest her soul, from the special events side of our industry, did a lot on risk management. Brent Ritchie from Australia does a lot on tourism risk management. So a lot of that went into sort of where these materials came from. So it's not like this is all brand new information. It's all come from everywhere. But what all of these people and all of this material really agrees on is there's just not one size fits all plan. And, that's where we hear a lot is, I get a lot of requests where, do you have a plan I can use for my meeting? And so as we were developing this and putting these materials together, what was realized is that we really needed to put something together, A, to educate people on the many different aspects of sort of what needed to be put together, but B, that we needed to sort of explain sort of all the stages, of what needed to be done. And then we needed to give people examples and then give them some exercises. So this risk management guide sort of gives examples and gives definitions, but it also gives people some working steps to go through and some activities to go through so that this information is scalable for their meetings and their events. And it gives them the different activities so that they can look at their particular meetings and where the risks are as associated based on who they're meeting, who's attending their meeting, where the meeting is, what their program is like. Whenever I've done workshops on this, I always ask, like, who has the heavy drinkers? What's going on at the destination you're going to? Are you having kids at is it a youth program? So all of those factors are going to go into the different kind of risks. And that's how we sort of built this. Everybody's SWOT analysis is going to look different. And so, just going through this and looking at, we use the NFPA all hazards approach in looking at this. So that's sort of how this was developed. And we really tried to take the best from the different documents that were out there and build on those. The US Department of Homeland Security has a safe and healthy mass gatherings document that's very similar to one that Australia has, that Canada has. I don't know if that was collaboration or copying. I'm not gonna venture a guess there. But we know that those documents are out there and that they're very similar. So we really tried to build this in a way that it's scalable and customizable for whatever type of meeting or event or show that somebody in the industry has. And to make it as user-friendly as it possibly could be, so that it would be functional for any type of meeting or event. And that was the goal. Now, if anybody's a purist out there in crisis, disaster, or emergency management, then they would probably understand that each of those fields, much like our meetings or our trade shows or our special events, are different fields. So are crisis, disaster, emergency management, but I won't bog you down in the academics of it all, even though I could talk to you for days about it. And if you'd like to, please call me because I miss talking about that kind of stuff. But that's just me and my academic mind. So anyway, I'm super excited that this is finally being launched. I have to thank Mariella McElraith for all of her work and her tolerance of me and going through this, and everybody at EIC and everybody that contributed, and Stuart for looking over this and his expertise in insurance and all of that. It's really been a fun project. So I'm really grateful to have been a part of it. So anyway, it has been my pleasure.
Kyra, thank you very much for that excellent overview and introduction. pull a couple of notes out of that. One, you touched upon country or continental differences, and I'm sure I can see in the chat box already today that we have attendees from all around the world. So when we get to the Q&A, we may find some questions or commentary that's coming out from our attendees in different parts of the world. And we encourage that, of course, because the guide has looked at those differences. The other was at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the 5 stages, the risk assessment, risk analysis, onto emergency planning, onto emergency response, and evaluation and revision, which is a nice way of looking at a really comprehensive and complex set of considerations. What I'm interested in, though, to ask you today is, bearing in mind you said this is foundational, has been built on many years of work and tireless input from those inside and out of the industry. But in the last 18 months, out of those 5 stages, which have been affected the most in terms of change or additions to risk assessment and management, in your view? Which of the stages, or? Yes. Which of the stages have had the most change, most evolvement?
Sure. Well, I think risk assessment sort of got short shrift a little bit because we sort of didn't take the time to do that, because the COVID-19 sort of fell upon us, and I think sometimes we put our heads in the sand a little bit sometimes when we see things coming, and we aren't willing to. What I saw anyway with COVID-19 is, even though we saw it coming in some places, we didn't take the time to say, hey, there's a risk coming. A lot of people were like, oh, that's over there, wherever there was. And we didn't take the time to say, hey, let's stop, let's assess the risk, let's analyze how it may affect us, and then go through the rest of the steps. Part of the challenge I think we have in our industry is we're such a fast moving industry, we don't always stop and take that time.
Yeah, thank you. They're really relevant points for us to consider in our own journey that we've been taking over the last 18 months. Tyra, thank you. I'm going to move us on now to Liz. Liz, we heard from your bio that you've been a key member of the senior management team of some very complex global event projects, including Atlanta and the Sydney Olympic Games, the World Cup, the events for Coca-Cola, and more than 50 presidential advanced projects. One of the strategies that you've successfully employed and talked about at length is an event readiness exercise. And we'd really value if you can tell us a little bit more about these exercises, why and how they're developed, how they're delivered, and indeed any recommendations for us fellow event professionals to use them for all of our own events.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you to EIC for including me as part of this panel. And a few notes just before we jump into it. I've got 3 quick slides to help bring context to the conversation. But before I start, I think just to frame something for everyone in the audience, even though my background is in large corporate meetings and events, as well as several Olympics and World Cups, the work we're going to talk through on the event readiness exercise really has application to any size meeting, no matter what the location is. It has application for you. So whether you're with a trade association, a nonprofit, you will find application in this. The second thing is I wanted to give some definition for how I've worked with the term incident versus crisis. An incident is, we have defined by saying it's anything that's disruptive to the scheduled program. And incidents are the majority of situations that happen for meeting planners. So it's really good to frame, I think, this conversation around event readiness exercise. It's not just for a crisis, because those do happen, but they're rarer. It's also has direct application for incidents. And in terms of the definition for crisis, of how we've worked with it in a number of Fortune 100 companies that I've worked with, it's really where there's a very dire sense of urgency, and also where there's a magnitude of impact. So that's what elevates it from an incident to a crisis. And then the scenarios that we're going to touch on as part of this exercise, they really come to light when you have things happen, because you don't have a playbook, or you do have a playbook that you've worked on with your team, not just your ops team, but security and communications team. But when things happen, you can't go looking for a playbook for page 12 of how to respond. These exercises help create sort of an indelible impression on first line responders of protocols they need to be ready to put in place without actually going to a playbook. So that's important. And then finally, I think for many decades, I think planners have been doing a fabulous job of responding operationally to situations with their risk management and or security teams. But I think the key piece where we've seen gaps, especially in the last 5 years, have been the integration of an operational response with communications. And that can be communications to attendees and or employees, or externally communications to from an external, whether that's media or social media, or media meaning traditional media, print and broadcast. So let's go into the couple slides that give it a little more definition. So next slide, please. So what is an event readiness exercise? It's really just a tabletop exercise. It's prior to the start of the event. I've usually done it at the pre-con, either before or after the pre-con or the day before. And it brings in all first line stakeholder responders that are key for the delivery of the event. What's the purpose of it? Is really to make sure there's operational and communications understanding of the process and the protocols that are put in place in terms of responding to an incident or a crisis. It makes sure that there's timely integration of an operations response with communications. And it's also making sure in advance that you have a clear, the senior management of your organization understands the approval process of switching to a response around any kind of incident or crisis. What you don't want is a senior management person in the middle of a lobby or a venue kind of barking orders because they just didn't understand that you already had a protocol and a process in place. That actually becomes a secondary disruptor. You don't want that. So the understanding of the approval process is key. Next slide, please. So who needs to be part of this? There's two pieces. One is on site, and that's the lead planner as well as any operations lead. So it could be F&B, housing, transportation. And then in addition, you want security and or risk management, IT, creative services, or any other folks that are playing a key role. From the hotel or venue side, you really want someone from the front desk, security, an engineer ideally, head bellman, sales rep, F&B rep, and sometimes depending on the scope of the audience in the program or event, you want the GM. Third-party partners, great to have, and it's really almost mandatory to have a transportation lead person there, a DMC partner, or anyone else who's playing a key supportive role for your program. In terms of calling in, this goes back to the integration of the communications piece with the operations. So on the right-hand column here, we have the communication side. So you want the point person for internal comms calling in for this exercise. And you also want, if you have an external PR person, you want them calling in as well. Next slide, please. So what happens at this ERE? So it's really, you've got a setup of pretty straightforward. It's banquet tables. You have 4 or 5 people at each table, and you're mixing up the stakeholders. There's an intro of all the stakeholders. It usually takes 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how many folks are there. And that's really key because oftentimes you don't even know who the engineer, the venue engineer is, and what his name is, and what his role is, and is there a 24-hour coverage? And you go through all the folks that are there, and they get to hear names, faces, and who's responsible for what. And then you go through the scenarios themselves, which is usually you have 5 to 8 scenarios, depending on the complexity of the program. It takes about an hour to an hour and a half. And then you have concluding comments at the end. The scenarios themselves are drafted usually by the security lead and the lead planner. You're doing 1 scenario per page. It can be as short as a paragraph, but it's really important that it's real time and it's specific issues that you're writing in that are specific to that particular program. And then at the end, you have prompts that have what is the operational response and what is the internal or external response. And sometimes there aren't external responses. Sometimes PR is not necessarily, but you always want to touch on it to make sure you can eliminate it. Each table of stakeholders has 5 minutes to come up with the response to developing a mitigating situation. And then they report it out. Security, the lead planner, and the comms people are responding and weigh in on what your responses are. And that's the end of the scenario piece. The key benefit of this exercise is it surfaces misunderstandings of who owns what. Oftentimes people don't realize, even within planner staffs, that the venue and the hotel or hotel have ownership of anything that's on their property. So there's a piece around that gets integrated into these exercises that becomes very valuable. And people walk out of the session with a much clearer understanding of who owns what and who responds first on if there's an incident or a crisis. So that's in a very condensed piece, Mark.
Thank you, Liz.
Back to you.
Liz, I love event readiness and exercise. You know, structure and process equals control, and you walked us through in a very thorough way. It reminds me I have to think about having a process and structure in place when I drop my phone down the toilet in the future, because then I'm kind of out of control and nobody likes that. But thank you very much. We're going to move on to Melvin now. Now, Melvin, you've spoken previously about the importance of not forgetting the more foundational work of creating equity and justice for all. As we look to getting our industry back on its feet, it is critical now. Can you talk to us about how your team have been, going through what you've described as this a community embarking on a healing and introspection process, and how do we, again, as event professionals, apply this focus on social justice to our risk management situations that we might face in the months to come?
Well, thank you, Mark, and greetings to everyone, whatever time zone you might be in. I want to just harken back to a phrase that Liz just used, an incident versus a crisis. And indeed, the events that occurred in Minneapolis beginning on May 25th, 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, did begin with an incident, did evolve into a crisis, but the good news is that our story did not end there. What I want to quickly do is to show you these 3 slides as a bit of background. These are not the typical beauty shots that a destination marketing organization might show you, but these are very, very telling in terms of how our community has grown. This is a setting just a few weeks ago at a city park where some of the boards that were on boarded up buildings during our unrest last year were collected and put into an art exhibit. Moving on to the next slide, you see a similar depiction of a community festival, people coming together, really reflecting on the messages that were placed on the boards that were on boarded up buildings. And then the final slide that I wanted to just share with you is what our community has done. What you see is a sea of grocery bags, volunteers, people making donations to areas of our community where there were damaged or destroyed grocery stores and markets. So our community has really grown during the course of this experience. And as you can imagine, we've been traumatized together. It is a community experience, and people speak of it in that terms and in those terms, and certainly things that we'll not forget. But to begin that process of healing and introspection, to get back to the question very, very quickly, we have to first of all acknowledge that those events did impact us as a team at Meet Minneapolis and also as a community. The good news is that at Meet Minneapolis, we were able to direct those raw emotions, and they were very raw. If you were, whether you were here in Minneapolis or any other place in the world and saw that atrocious video of the police officer with his knee on the neck of Mr. George Floyd, you can imagine how much more pronounced that was here in Minneapolis, but we were able to take those raw emotions and actually begin to process them into some productive activities that would assist in the community. And one of the most prominent examples of that, processing those raw emotions, is an internal entity that we formed called the Meet Minneapolis Legacy Project, MMLP. And it is designed to develop targeted social justice and racial reconciliation initiatives for the Meet Minneapolis team, for the broader hospitality community, including our customers, because we found that our customers definitely want to be a part of this journey. And the whole purpose is to assist us in rebuilding and restoring our hospitality industry. So that was, to me, the foundation of how we've been able to make so much progress in the course of a year. The flagship initiative of the Meet Minneapolis Legacy Project is a speaker series, which is community conversations with community leaders. We have had 4 so far of these speaker series, and this is just wonderful work that our team is doing. We have first the Discover Minneapolis' Past, how history plays a part in where we are today. We then had a speaker series on prosperity and disparity in Minneapolis and how wealth distribution impacts our communities. Then we had speaker series on how healthcare, access to healthcare impacts economic health. Then we had one, most recent one was on how public safety makes our communities vibrant and resilient. And then the next one is Beyond City Hall, Community Voices Matter. So it might be curious as to why a destination marketing organization is getting so heavily involved in social issues. But if you've looked at the evolution of destination marketing organizations, we've gone beyond just marketing what we have, but really focusing on how we can enhance the product. And one of the ways in which we enhance the product is how people view us in the public. And so that's been very much a part of what we've done over the last year. Obviously, the way that a city is viewed impacts attendance, delegate attendance. And so we want to be a partner with our meeting professionals in terms of addressing that. But we are working side by side with business organizations and economic development organizations like chambers of commerce and regional economic development entities to see that our city prospers and is welcoming to all people, because that's something that I believe is a benefit to meeting professionals. And I talked about those speaker series that we've had. We've actually invited some of our customers, some of our meeting professional customers, to attend those, and we'd certainly make them available for anyone else who wants to attend them. We know that event professionals who are responsible for the success of their events in a city that they're going to wants to ensure a not only a safe experience and productive experience, but an authentic experience for their attendees. And I believe that's what most DMOs do, and we certainly try to do that. And we also know that event professionals don't always know the right questions to ask, particularly in a rapidly changing situation. So we want to make sure that we are available and proactive in the way in which we communicate with event professionals. In fact, with the various crises that evolved over the course of last year after the killing of George Floyd, we were very proactive in communicating to our meeting professional community about the situation in the city. We felt it was important for our meeting professional customers to hear things from us directly and not just be trying to process what was dealt with, what was provided in the media. So we wanted to enhance that partnership. I think it's also worth noting as I wrap up here that during the pandemic, DMOs have become even more partnered with their peer organizations. We've created more interaction with our peer cities, and that's because we were all going through a number of the same things at the same time. And I believe that benefits the meeting professional because there's more consistency and more understanding across the country as to issues that can impact hosting events and obviously attendance. And again, just to conclude, because of the role of a DMO in the local community, we can help mitigate the risk for meeting professionals. We have access to public safety, civic leaders, and we are definitely the one-stop shop. And even though events come to a destination and leave after a few days, attendees to those events and the event professionals will experience the destination in the same way locals do. So Mark, I'll just leave it at that and be happy to answer any other questions that might arise during the course of this webinar.
Melvin, thank you so much. The one thing that I can say is that if the passion and desire for change is going to be foundational for the transformation that's to follow, it's going to be radical and it's going to be rapid, because the passion and the desire for change is absolutely there. Thank you so much. That's a critical element for us to be covering today. Now, I would like to head over to Beta of SASIUS. Now, through the pandemic, SASIUS has been a leader in the discussion on industry resilience. I remember some of this from the early webinars that EIC put on. But how does building resilience work in tandem with risk management? How do we build resilience into our events to be more successful? Beta, take us through your story. We're really interested.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, and the EIC community for inviting me here. But before I begin, I just want to say a word of thanks to Melvin. I'm very moved by what Minneapolis have done. I think what I've begun to also realize, and I think many of us begun to realize, is that events cannot happen without people. And human lives, human connections are so key to the success of events. So let us not forget, as we rebuild back our strength, rebuild back our industry resilience, that we also build back joy and happiness amongst our human lives. So before I begin, I'd like to first and foremost talk a little bit about Singapore's view on risk management. May I have the next slide, please? So Singapore's approach to risk management is it's more towards risk elimination. Okay. Oh, yes, that's right. Singapore's reliance on external connections and visitors necessitates us to adopt a risk management instead of a risk elimination approach, right? For Singapore, remaining in an open economy does not just refer to the trade in goods and services. It is also the regular exchange of flow of ideas, talents, and people. Our events and MICE industry has been the cornerstone of our country's success and will remain so for the many years to come. So shutting ourselves off from the world is never an option for us in Singapore, as we are unable to tap into the large reservoir and the large population or domestic travel to sustain our own tourism and event sector. We also cannot expect to eliminate risks entirely all the time. So learning how to manage the risk will be a far more productive approach. It will place us in good stead, as we never know what would be the next crisis that might hit us, or what might be the next virus that would disrupt air travel. Therefore, our approach for our country has always been risk management rather than risk elimination. Next slide, please. From the get-go, SASIUS is focused on the capacity and the ability of our industry to adapt and recover quickly from the difficulties. Whilst human beings can live on grit and determination, SASIUS viewed that our industry requires us to equip and prepare our workers, our organization, and our industry with capabilities to build back better. We wanted to focus on productive outcomes. Being part of the globally connected community, it has been a great fortune to be affiliated to organizations such as the EIC. The wonderful work that has been created into a rich resource library, we could actually tap into these resources and glean on best practices. It helped us to contextualize and build it upon our own learnings onto our own laws and our lay of our land. We defined what resiliency might look like for the events industry for Singapore, as well as our neighboring countries. So SACIUS, together with our industry players, work with the government agencies on a roadmap in building resilience. This roadmap is called the Event Industry Resilience Roadmap, which is a slide that you've seen much earlier on. This articulated a very guided approach. Number one, it established what is best-in-class standards for the implementation of safe business events. We call that the SG Safe Event Standard. This Safe Event Standard has been adopted by the Nations Standards Council as a recognizable and a creditable national standard. Number two, we created agile business models with a focus on hybridization. And number three, we re-engineered educational pathways in order for us to develop targeted programs so that we can build up new and critical competencies for a nice workforce. How does SACIUS help the industry build back stronger? Importantly, we look at how we can help our industry adapt to the new normal. We lead and we do, and we show the way. Our events ecosystem is wide, deep, and diversified. Like Liz earlier on has well defined, there are many stakeholders playing very critical as well as supporting roles to the whole food chain of the event. So now let me share three things that we did to build resilience to all forms of risk for events. Next slide, please. The industry needs to have a clear and consistent operating environment to build back trust. So from the event industry roadmap, what SACIUS has done is that we translated it into what we call the SG Safe Event Standard. This SG Safe Event Standard became the manual that the government, the agencies, and the common hymn sheet and common operating environment for the event for the ecosystem in order to operate safe event management. Number two, next slide, please. We develop competencies through training and certification. We develop what we call the SG Safe Event Ambassador from the SG Safe Event Standard. So from the industry standard, we created certification programs to train our individuals in which they can be operationally ready to conduct and construct, and also to comply with safe management protocols when they are conducting their events. And to date, after 5 months of execution, we have close to 1,700 ambassadors that are now in the marketplace that are standing ready, operationally ready to be deployed to events when we are reopened. As we guide and shape the industry, we also focus on risk assessment. And this risk assessment helped enterprises to look at the overall upholding, conduct, construct, and compliance to this safe management measures. And what we then did was that we worked with the government in recognizing the organizations who would comply and conduct safe management measures and to be independently audited by a panel of certification bodies. We take venues, organizers, and suppliers towards achieving a mark of assurance that they can be more confidently deliver the trust that the customers as well as the attendees would look forward to in the new normal. These certified organizations now use these best practices into the rollout of pilot events that we're currently test bedding in our own country. Finally, we believe that living normally with COVID-19 is our roadmap for new normal, right? We are now drawing up a roadmap to transit from the event industry resilience roadmap. Our country is now drawing out its own roadmap. History has shown that every pandemic will run its course. However, we must harness all our energies of people, our resources, as well as our creativity in order for us to transit as quickly as we can to the desired end state. We believe that science and human ingenuity will eventually prevail over COVID-19. However, cohesion and social consciousness and consistent communications will get us there much faster. Therefore, therefore, we believe that everyone should do our own part.
Peter, thank you so much. One thing that jumps out from me there from Singapore is resilience is born from focus and structure, and you've created that from the word go, and it's inspiring to see what Singapore has done. Now we're going to head over to Stuart in just one moment, but what I will do is I'll ask this wonderful audience, get your questions in. We will have time for Q&A, but every one of those questions that you put in that we don't get to with this expert panel, we will follow up with the answers when we share the recording. So our panelists will be answering it, whether it's live today or shortly afterwards. So please fill that chat box with some great questions. Stuart, we're going to move over to you now. In the planning calls, you talked to us about looking for the opportunity within risk management and taking the time to closely examine situations just to see if there's a possibility to instead turn that risk into added value. And I find that a fascinating way to look at challenges and potential threats. So can you tell us more about this and provide an example or two along the ways of how you've managed to, switch from risk and challenge to opportunity and something to wow your audience?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. And thank you to all my fellow co-panelists here. It's been a really wonderful presentation so far, and I'm happy to participate in a conversation about risk as it relates to our events industry. But it really begins with a thorough process, and the Risk Management Guidebook that the EIC is releasing right now does a really great job of trying to help you walk through the stages of having a thorough SWOT analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of your event. And I would say with that, too often we focus on just the negative aspects that are there. We want to immediately eliminate a risk that we see or identify. We oftentimes, as event professionals, don't open this conversation up to a larger audience with our key stakeholders, perhaps, including a city or a strategic partner, or even our organizational leadership. So we really need to think about having risk committees for large scale events, I believe, and really looking into conducting a thorough SWOT analysis that really focuses on finding opportunities. And as you identify some of the weaknesses and threats, and if you counter those, you can often find times opportunities that can create additional value or even produce new revenue. So one of the stories I like to tell, and we're fairly fond of here at RIMS, is a story actually to help you think about risk in a different way. Is a story about a university that was in California that had a big risk about their olive trees. They had these beautiful olive trees on campus, right? The trees were glorious, people loved them, but the olives would fall and create slip and fall accidents and a lot of heavy claims and things like that for them. So you think about managing the risk around that. And I love how Beta put it. It's not just eliminating risk, it really is managing risk. But your immediate thought is to eliminate the risk. It is to eliminate the olive tree, eliminate the slip and fall hazard. But a thorough risk management assessment and a thorough SWOT analysis of that engages multiple parties like finance and legal and things like that, produced a different idea around that actually harvested the olives and created a brand of olive oil that created a new revenue stream that sustained the harvesting, sustained the farming of it, and things like that. So that's just a really great example of like how a thorough risk assessment or analyzing a risk can really create new value and a new opportunity. And as that relates to the events industry, I had this thought recently, just the other day, that right now, for example, event technology companies are really innovating and finding new opportunities where risk is present. So for example, looking recently at the new need for social distancing and people's fear of maybe being in long registration lines at events and things like that, you see companies that are now identifying that risk, and how they're managing it or finding opportunity in there is to innovate with a new digital badging system, for example, with registration. So I just saw that recently at the World of Concrete. Did a great job of that, of showing QR codes from your phones, even different colors for the badge type and everything. So it eliminated the entire risk of having to be in line or the social distancing need and things like that. So it really makes you think about risk in a different way and try to find those new opportunities. I'd say within that as well, one of the things that I think event professionals always need to keep in mind that we sometimes don't is considering reputational risk as well. Reputational risk to your organization or to your event brand can be very powerful, and the wrong decision could damage your reputation, which is which is something we don't want to do. So I think a thorough risk assessment not only includes, finance, legal, and all those other kinds of things, but really focusing on the reputational bottom line and the risk to your organization or to your event brand as well. Every business, every event business decision has some inherent level of risk. And I think it's interesting that, as business event professionals, we wear so many hats. We are marketers, we are finance people, we are legal people, we are become insurance people, some of us sometimes. But wearing that risk management hat is critically important for successful event management. And I think that, again, it really begins with understanding the process of really thoroughly doing a SWOT analysis, a thorough risk assessment of your event, which is not always going to be negative kinds of things, obviously. At RAMS, we always promote the fact that good risk management can lead to opportunity and increased value. And oftentimes you'll find through a thorough process of a SWOT analysis or the right risk assessment that it does.
Stuart, what really resonated with me with those examples that you've talked about off camera and on camera is the fact that actually some of the most difficult challenges that were there in the past, like the long lines and and those sort of things, if we can find a way of solving those problems, but by enhancing the experience through doing something that isn't easy to think of, then we're meeting that need and desire to create bigger and better memories and more creative environments. So we're feeding the need to get more ROI from our events, as well as addressing and reducing the risks. And if we just took every challenge through your SWOT analysis approach, of which great templates in the guide, really good examples that are included in there for us to all take away, we could really enhance the event as well as reducing our risk. It's wonderful. I did pick out from the SWOT analysis, by the way, where it talked about attendee profiles. And I think the first three were, do you have elderly attendees? Is alcohol involved? And the third one, do you have young attendees? Can you actually merge two of those? Because I know quite a few elderly people that also drink alcohol as well. Maybe reduce the the categorization from 3 to 2 there. I'm sure that will apply to some of our industry events that we know too well. But it's a fresh way of thinking about risk management. And probably when we look at all of the areas that Liz, Melvin, Tyra, and Beta have talked about, if we push them through that SWOT analysis and keep one creative eye on creating something truly memorable for people as a result of that process, it's really good advice. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you to all of the panel. Now we've come into the time where we can get a little bit hot under the collar because we're not in control of the questions that are going to come from our audience today. So I'm going to invite Mariella back onto camera, who's been tracking that chat box, which I know has been moving feverishly to my left, although I haven't been reading it, to call out some of the questions that have come around in the last 45 minutes.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all of our panelists and our participants for being here today. We've had a few questions that have come up, and a few of them are related to the event readiness exercise. So I'm going to sort of consolidate some of this into one question for you, Liz. Can you tell us a little bit about the practical logistics around when it's scheduled, how you are able to get that many people in the room, and what the communication process is following and preceding the ERE?
Sure, I'm happy to add to that. So I think there has to be a conversation with all the relevant stakeholders about the importance of this exercise. And it really benefits everyone, not just the organized, the people hosting the meeting, but all relevant stakeholders benefit from this exercise. So I think the first thing is having a conversation about how it benefits everyone. And it does it provides clarity on roles and responsibilities, which everyone usually wants to know. And you're doing it in advance prior to the event kicking off. So it's in a calm, quiet environment. You're not in the middle of an incident or a crisis and trying to figure it out then. You're really dealing with it in advance. And the exercise is really playing off a playbook that should be established. But in terms of when it happens, as I think touched on briefly, the best time we've found is either before or after the pre-con. I know one of the questions in the chat asks about how do you get other stakeholders to commit to the time to do it, which is an hour and a half. I think it's just, again, having that open and transparent conversation about the benefits of having it, but also the risk if you don't have it. So, and the irony is we're talking about risk, but if you don't have this, there's potentially a lack of understanding of who owns what response pieces if something were to happen. So usually when we include that in the conversation with the general manager, if we need them to sign off either from a venue perspective or a hotel perspective to letting their folks come and participate in this, then they get it. And it's never been an issue, honestly, of getting people's time commitment. Hope that helps.
Yes, thank you, Liz. And
Sure.
we also have a question regarding when people think it's going to be possible for us to really start hosting large international events again, when people expect that it will be both feasible and practical to be doing this. I wanted to, let's see, why don't we start with Vida, and then we'll move over to Melvin.
Well, I think if I have a crystal ball, I'll say tomorrow, but I can't. The jury is still out there. I think there are also a lot of discussions against different jurisdictions with regards to the vaccination passport, the digital passport. So for us in Singapore, we are doing it more in a very collaborated manner. So slowly, gradually, our borders might be opened, but we'll wait and see.
I would agree with Bita. Don't really have a crystal ball, but we work very closely with one of our major carriers, which is Delta, and we've been tracking when they are resuming some of their international service into Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, and it appears that much of that is beginning to happen late summer into early fall. And we actually do have on our books a couple of international conferences for later this year. So we're very, very optimistic, but don't have any firm answers on that particular question.
Thank you, Melvin. And I'll pass it back to Mark for the closing comments, and we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariella, and thank you all for the questions that have been provided for our expert panel today. I'd just like to thank again Liz, Stuart, Bita, Melvin, Tyra, and also reference again a point that Tyra made at the beginning, showing appreciation to Mariella and all of those who have been involved in putting together this latest Apex guide. They are so valuable. The work that you do will be, foundational for years to come, and it gives us all peace of mind that we have a process that we can follow and get us back to that point that Bita and Melvin were talking about there, where we can welcome back not only domestic but international travel as well. So on behalf of the whole meetings industry around the globe, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your thoughts and your advice with us today. And on that note, I'm going to hand back to Marshall, and thank you for closing today's session, Marshall.
You're quite welcome. That concludes today's webinar. On behalf of EIC, I would like to thank our moderator, Mark Cooper, and all of our fantastic panelists. EIC will be sending our live attendees their 1 hour CE within 1 week. This webinar will be available for playback on the EIC YouTube channel as well. The webinar will now end. Thank you very much, everyone.